or specific Department of Commerce or Department of Energy or DARPA to look at ways to advance the technology. And I think one reason that I'm very happy to be here representing the University of California and California education in general is that this is something that we really should grab a hold of as California, because we have to maintain our competitiveness. We always have, and it's this critical link between innovation and manufacturing, and the education is the thing that ties it together, as well as sort of joint development of activities. And so I'm really happy to have a chance to meet these gentlemen, and we'll be following up with them as well.
Great. Maybe, Mr. Chairman, one more comment on the education piece. The state of California produces world-class engineers, to be sure, and our company is just lousy with engineers. We've got engineers all over the place, and you have to be effective in manufacturing. But really, the backbone of our workforce at a lot of our operations is a profile of worker who hasn't necessarily gotten 4 years of a university degree or 5 years, maybe just has a technical certificate, is attended, gotten some type of certification through a technical college. And it's probably a challenge, continues to be a challenge for employers like us to help get the word out to that profile of potential employee that you can make an excellent living in a very gratifying workplace and be challenged without having to go to college, if that's your preference. And I think it's something that we all probably, I would argue, all have a shared responsibility to make sure that all Californians are aware of the wide range of career tracks that are available to them, and that we make sure in the decisions we make that that's emphasized.
Okay.
I have one comment. I think you brought up a really good point earlier, and I found it very informative when you explained how California at one point was at the pinnacle of manufacturing output, and how that's since declined. And I think right now, and it might be a subtle nuance, but I think with decisions and with efforts like you're working on right now, you're really shaping the future of what the context of manufacturing looks like in the future, primarily because a lot of times things are driven by economics. And if you keep that in mind, if not advanced manufacturing, and then how you define that can be particularly important, then what else as an alternative, right? And I think that advanced manufacturing is something we should aspire to cultivate within our state, and anything we can do to that end, I think, would be a benefit, especially if it puts us on par competitively with our other peer states.
Right.
I think just to foot stomp that whole subject, so I think we can agree on education as an area to focus. I think you brought up earlier the point about if we're trying to grow something like the Boeing Company, we make decisions on where we can grow capacity, and we'd certainly like California to be one of those locations. So that leads you to incentives, whether it's tax or some sort of a public-private partnership about building locations or taking advantage of existing public infrastructure, education or whatever, in some sort of partnership. Those kind of things, I think, can all go a long ways towards building kind of a framework for how you might want to look at, advanced manufacturing incentive.
Okay. Questions, comments from committees? Senator Emerson.
Thank you. Just yesterday, Senator Padilla, we had testimony on information systems and communications, how that technology changes in 18 months. Many times that technology changes before these gentlemen have the depreciation on the equipment they've just purchased. So we have to take a look at some other ways to create those incentives. And I heard Mr. Hensel say that they have issues with highly skilled machinist and technical people. That's one of the big issues that's a problem in industry today. And I'd just like to say that down in my area, there's an organization called Kelly Space Technology, which has just developed, they're doing some private explorations in space. And a guy by the name of Mike Gallo heads that organization. And he could never find qualified machinists, technical machinists, to to produce the kinds of people he needed to employ. So he started a charter school to train highly technical machinists. Just this last year, he graduated 32 machinists, and 30 of them were taken up by industry within minutes of their graduation. And I believe Boeing was one of the big recipients for their 787 that hired some with their subcontractors down in San Bernardino County. So I think we need to start looking at more issues along those lines rather than looking at a college degree with respect to engineering. As my friend Kimberly Clark stated, we need a much broader workforce. And there's just one other problem in this state. We're not very friendly to industries in many ways, and I think the key to that is we probably buy more Priuses in this state, and Toyota just left the state to go to Mississippi, and there's something very wrong with that whole picture. No question.
Senator DeLeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank you for your leadership on this issue with regards to advanced manufacturing. I'm coming late to this informational hearing, but so you can educate me. Given that advanced manufacturing requires advancements in technologies, obviously, with regards to improved production systems, playing a little devil's advocate in this case too, with regards to any types incentives from the state of California and ultimately from the taxpayer of California, with regards to these advanced technologies for improved, production systems, would that be counter to increasing employment in the state of California when you have these advanced technologies? And others, do you have a more reduced workforce? And let me add this too, because I kind of know where I feel I sense where Senator Padilla is going with this, and I agree with Senator Padilla in terms of the history of the state of California. Obviously, right now we're the largest economy in the entire world. We used to be very robust with regards to our manufacturing industry in the state of California. We run the real risk, the danger of being almost exclusively an intellectual capital state of the world, especially with Silicon Valley and the biotech industry, whereas the great ideas are born here. But when it comes to manufacturing the actual product itself, the volume of the jobs to put it together are being outsourced or offshored. If it's not outsourced to other states, in particular right-to-work states. I think you mentioned, what was it, Tennessee with regards to Toyota, or it's being offshored, obviously, to other parts of the world. And then you've juxtaposed and made comparisons with South Carolina or Illinois, or in this case, Texas. And it's always, it's a little, sometimes it's difficult to pivot and compete. I know we have to compete if we're going to save the jobs, create more jobs in California. One thing is, obviously, this is my opinion, we can never compete with a state like Texas. It's too difficult. Texas is America's China. That's just the bottom line. And it's you're not going to compete in that sense, with Texas. But we can do everything possible.
Would that be from a human rights violation standpoint?
That could be actually with regard to that too, But enlighten me or educate me with regards to advanced, manufacturing, and does that actually decrease employment? Or are we at a position right now, if we don't move forward with advanced, manufacturing in California, it's not a question about, increasing employment. It's a question that we're either going to be here or we have to uproot ourselves altogether and go somewhere else, whether it's another part of the country or it's another part of the world.
Yeah, if I may, I think it's a good question. It's a fair question, and it does affect employment. It moves it around. If we get more efficient because we've bought advanced technology from another company, and we don't need as many employees, then it's smart business for us to do that in many cases. But somebody had to manufacture that equipment to sell it to us, and somebody had to ship it to us, and we're still in business because we got more efficient. So it really makes or saves jobs more than loses jobs. But it does have an effect. Yeah, there are areas where you get more efficient. You don't need as many people. but it allows you to focus on areas maybe where you need more people. So I don't see it as anything but a positive for the economy to get more efficient overall, over the long haul.
Senator, if I could respond to that one as well. It's an excellent question. I would suggest that at least with our company and others, when you find a way to make product more efficiently, let's say in our case, use less fiber, use less energy, use less demand on natural resources and so forth, and the technology is requiring a higher skill set out of the employees that operate that equipment, I think it raises all boats. One effect of being more technologically sound and advanced in a company like ours, where our Fullerton mill is competing not necessarily with Procter & Gamble's mill that makes products similar to this, but not as good. But we're competing.
Yours is softer.
Yeah, that's right. In all other respects, Senator. But it also, what they're really doing is competing with Kimberly-Clark mills that make this product. Even though we're certainly not likely to ship that product from South Carolina to California, we could ship it from Oklahoma potentially. So what that investment in a particular location does is it makes them more competitive from a larger sense. It lowers their cost of manufacturing, which really makes it easier for them to compete for more capital and more jobs within the company they reside. So we think there's it's an energizing effect for that facility to grow in the future.
I think we found another benefit to if you can become more efficient utilizing technology, which may require less individual laborers to get a piece part built, but overall you become more efficient and your product becomes more attractive from an affordability standpoint. Then what you find is you have your opportunity into adjacent markets becomes greater. That adjacent market then finds that you need to build something else or provide some software feature around that capability that these adjacent markets want. That then you are now not only you don't need less workforce to handle the original market that you were trying to address with whatever manufacturing capability, but you now need a growing workforce because you're now taking the same kind of product and going into adjacent markets, and you find yourself in a growth situation rather than you don't need the workforce that you need. So it's you can find yourself by becoming more efficient, opening yourself up to new markets, and then having a much better situation than what you might have suspected.
Yeah, I have a comment as well. I can speak from personal experience. I used to operate a biotech plant that was entirely manual at one point, so there were operators in there turning valves, doing the things that needed to be done. At some point, we made a decision to upgrade that plant and fully automate it. And I think one of the other panelists said that it does move the job demographics around a little bit. But rather than having people inside the clean rooms turning valves, instead I had calibration technicians and automation code, people working, doing different things, right? So it's not a direct reduction in workforce. And I think the other consideration is deciding where California wants to be in terms of the job demographics. Do we want to be on the leading edge with the advanced manufacturing type things, which is where the technology is going, not where it has been, right? And I think we could choose to be on either end of that spectrum, but I would argue that being on the advanced end is more beneficial because salaries are higher, more opportunities are greater, which translates into increased tax revenue and other things in a lot of different ways. So I wouldn't say that we're losing in any regard by making the decision to promote advanced manufacturing.
Then I would say, and I think if I'm wrong, please correct me, that you two gentlemen spoke to the issue of education and highly technical training and education, whether it's vocational, technical training. If the advanced technologies is going to a different level, obviously manufacturing planes, the aero industry back in the 50s and 60s and 70s was dramatically different, and obviously with the demise of the Cold War and the end of the Soviet Union as we know it today, obviously it transformed the aerospace industry, or it changed it dramatically, obviously, and had a severe impact regionally, at least with regards to economic recession and those individuals who had perhaps at the most a high school diploma, yet had a good paying union job working in the aerospace industry. The world changed overnight, obviously. Just what happened, tens of thousands of miles on the other side of the world with regards to the Cold War, and what do we do to educate these individuals and bring them up to a higher level? The incentives, obviously, is to some degree has been a sensitive issue at times, especially given today's economic climate. But without a doubt, it does deserve, without a doubt, a real look at a deeper look if it's going to help incentivize and provide California the most bang for the buck, with a real correlation, if you will, with any incentive that says actually we produce and sustain X amount of jobs, and like you said, we've contributed to the economy, to the state's coffers, through revenues, what have you, et cetera. So I just want to thank Senator Padilla for holding and organizing this hearing. It's been educational for me.
Thank you. Thank you. Any closing comments, Professor, or any closing recommendations for us as we take this on for the year?
Well, I was just going to make a comment, Mr. Chair. First of all, I think I agree with Senator Emerson, and maybe this came up earlier in the discussion, but absolutely we are talking about the full range of technical training. California, as I said earlier, has a fantastic system, a pipeline of junior colleges, Cal States, university systems that provides that. And what Adam Hansel was talking about, the skill set he needs for on the shop floor now, is what I was learning when I was an undergraduate engineer in Wisconsin back in the 60s. Part of the advantage of advanced technology and advanced manufacturing is it keeps the educational system always ahead also, so you're training the next generation of engineers and technicians, who then that technology moves down through the system, so people become higher skill set throughout the entire level. And I think that's an important, a very important piece, and it's something that we already have in California. So I think the other thing I'll mention that which hasn't come up and doesn't show up in the AMP portion is the Department of Labor has been putting a tremendous amount of effort into grants and funding to educate at the community college level students exactly in this area, and that's a sort of a free benefit that we get as part of the AMP program that can feed, but it needs the feedback from companies such as the ones represented here to help define those curricula as to what they actually need.
Great.
Thank you again for.
We'll look forward to staying in touch with you and working with you as the federal program gets fleshed out to align any state strategy to maximize our competitiveness. Thank you all very much for your time and for your presentations today. I invite you to stick around as we hear from the next panel. Let me invite forward Jack Stewart from the California Manufacturers and Technology Association, Jose Anaya from the Centers for Applied Competitive Technologies, and Sarah Flocks from the California Labor Federation.
Am I on here, James? It's on. Well, you have a copy of it there. I'll use that. Start off. Thank you, Senator, for hosting this
holding this hearing today. It's manufacturing, as you know, as you said in your opening remarks, in your history of manufacturing, I appreciate that, has declined dramatically in California. And one of the things that I would suggest that over the years we have had a dramatic growth in manufacturing early on, and in 1977 we did become the nation's #1 manufacturing state. But if you would look at the second graph there, you can see what has happened to manufacturing over the last 40 years in California. We have dropped off from 22% of our industrial workforce being manufacturing down to 8.9% of our workforce being industrial, down to 8.9% being industrial, and our output from 18% down to 11.5%. I would, you said earlier that there's two things we need to do. One is, take advantage of reshoring, and secondly, make sure that we fix our industrial climate. I would say that we need to do that in reverse, fix our industrial climate so we can take advantage of reshoring. The CMTA has done studies with the Milken Institute looking at the cost of manufacturing vis-a-vis the other 49 states. California comes up as about 23% more costly than the average of the other states, much of it driven by energy costs. And the National Association of Manufacturers has also done research looking at the cost of manufacturing in the United States versus the cost of manufacturing in the industrial states of Europe, North America, and Asia, and we come about 20% more costly there. So if you take our costs, 23% cost disadvantage, add it to the international disadvantage, we're almost 50% higher in cost than the average of the rest of the nation. I use that to emphasize the point some of the gentlemen made a minute ago, is that we really have a situation here where in order to be in business here, you really have to use all the latest techniques and manufacturing processes that are available to you. And I would also say that advanced manufacturing, as I say, it becomes to me, if you're not advanced and if you're not using the latest techniques, you're manufacturing someplace else, you're out of business, not in California. The third chart that I have it's titled California's Growth in Manufacturing Capacity is far below the national average. As you look at that chart, what we did is there's the Site Selection Magazine collects all of the information on manufacturing growth, both in terms of new facilities and expanded facilities nationwide, and reports that annually by state. They've kept those records since 1977, which is an interesting coincidence. When we reached #1 manufacturing state in 1977 is when Site Selection Magazine started keeping the numbers. But what we did on this chart was we took the last 4 years, 2007 to 2010, and looked at all the startups and expansions nationwide, and then normalized that for population, so we could see how many startups and expansions there were per million people in each of the states. As you can see on that chart, California got about 4.8 startups or expansions per million people. The national average is 40.3. So we have not nearly getting our fair share of the industrial investment in California. The next chart looks at California's manufacturing investment. This is the same type of information, only look at dollars invested, how many dollars are invested in industrial expansion per capita in each state. California was at $235. The national average was $1,335. And I might also add here that as we're coming out of this recession, there are many economists who are talking about the fact that manufacturing is actually leading the way out of this recession. And the fact is, in many cases, nationwide, manufacturing is leading the way. We looked at the numbers just here recently, looking at what the expansion of manufacturing jobs was nationally. Over the last 2 years, 2010 and 2011, we expanded manufacturing jobs on a national basis by about 4%. That was about 4,000 manufacturing jobs expanded in the United States. California actually lost jobs over those last 2 years. So while manufacturing is expanding in other states, California is still trying to figure out where our bottom is on manufacturing employment. Next chart, the one with the tall columns. This chart looks at the venture capital investment in California versus actual industrial investment in California. The chart is divided into 3 5-year periods, 1995 through 99, et cetera. And looking at the tall columns represent total venture capital investment in the United States. And the dark part of that column at the bottom represents the percentage of that investment that comes to California. And it's obviously very visibly seen there. California, by far, has more than its fair share of venture capital investment in California. Actually, we've got 45% over the last 15 years of all venture capital investment. However, when we look at what turns out to be actual industrial investment, that's the small columns next to the large columns, show that in the late 1995 to 99, we were at 7.7% of all industrial investment nationwide. In the first part of this last decade, 2000-2004, we dropped to 3.6%. In 2005 to 2009, I think a figure used earlier, 1.3% of all industrial investment came to California. And it's just really an unsustainable place for California to be as we try to grow our economy and grow middle-class jobs back to California. Certainly, the venture capital investment is welcome, and we hope it continues and we hope it grows. The fact is that we can't live on that alone. And I think somebody made the point earlier on manufacturing jobs, maybe it was you, Senator, that how does that translate into jobs? Well, we can venture capital investment usually happens in small companies with a very few number of highly educated scientists and engineers. But what we really need is the production side of it, which as soon as we have those ideas created, we're moving someplace else in the nation or someplace else in the world to create those massive jobs in the middle class area. So, and then there's another. The next chart shows the 33-year history of manufacturing in California. Each of those columns represents a year, and the numbers at the top represent the percentage of manufacturing investment that came into California. And that chart shows that from 1977 through 2000, California, although it peaked once during the defense buildup during the late 1980s, and again during the late 1990s with the high-tech bubble, what the fact is we got about 5.6% of all national industrial investment during that time. Not nearly what our percentage of the population was, but it was sustainable, and we continued to grow. Since 2000, we have been unable to attract that kind of investment in California. Our average since 2000 is 1.9% of national industrial investment. So we just continue to fall off the edge on investment. At one time, California has always been an innovative state, especially in the post-war era. The difference has happened is that the cost of doing business here has increased to a degree where now instead of innovating and manufacturing here, we innovate here, manufacture someplace else, and then market back to California. And California was really, our modern state budget, I would suggest, was developed during a time when we had a very robust, growing industrial economy. And we developed a budget that required those kind of new revenues every year. The only thing we could be certain of was that each year we'd see more revenues coming into the state. If there was a recession, we waited for 2 or 3 quarters, and it all turned around and came back. That's not happening anymore. We're not seeing that rebound in manufacturing here as we have seen in the past after major recessions. So I think that what we need to do is we need to look at programs like this and figure out how we incentivize companies to get here. And something that I would go back to a question that was asked earlier is, how does advanced manufacturing, how do you fit that in? How does that work? Well, the fact is, if we're already able to compete, why do we need additional incentives? And I would just say that we have every year the cost of manufacturing in California through California-only rules, regulations, fees go up. I mean, we have a law on the books right now that we're implementing, AB 32, that for some of these gentlemen at this table, they're going to have to absorb that $1 billion in cap and trade auction costs that are going to be forced on them. So it's not just how do you succeed today with today's costs. It's how do we succeed tomorrow with the additional costs we're going to be seeing as we go. More of our regulatory agencies go from general fund-based funding to fee-based funding by the companies that they represent. Those fees go up every year. So this kind of manufacturing, advanced manufacturing tax incentive would certainly go at least part of the way to mitigating some of those additional costs that we're seeing from year to year in a state that's already a very high-cost manufacturing state. So I will stop there and be happy to ask any questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Anaya?
I'll see if it works. Okay. Oh, great. It's working. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm Jose Anaya. I'm the Statewide Initiative Director for the Centers for Applied Competitive Technologies. We're part of the California Community College system under the Division of Economic and Workforce Development. And under that division, we really target 10 sectors of the economy. And my centers deal with manufacturing. Our mission for the Centers for Applied Competitive Technologies is to help small and medium manufacturers be globally competitive. And we do that through three things: workforce development, technology adoption, and business expansion. And how we execute our mission is basically we provide customized manufacturing training, technology dissemination, in other words, helping these small and medium manufacturers understand technology, embrace technology, and utilize that to be more effective and efficient. We also offer technical assistance, and we are the research and development arm for the community college system in terms of manufacturing. We're working with manufacturers, trying to understand their technologies, and where appropriate, we actually develop curriculum that we put back into the classroom at the community colleges. And we've done that around automated welding, composites that you heard earlier, photonics, rapid prototyping, or additive manufacturing. And just within the last 7 years, 5-7 years, we've reached down to the middle schools and high schools to educate them about jobs in engineering and technology. In other words, to fill that pipeline, because as the earlier group said, manufacturing has a bad reputation, and it's really hard to attract young people into the industry. Our centers are located up and down the state. Our northernmost one is at Rockland at Sierra College. Our southern center is in San Diego. Again, we support the 112 community colleges, which most of them have some level of technology programs. If you were to count all the technology programs at all the colleges, we have close to 604 technology programs. The core of what we do is workforce training. In other words, our goal is to develop a highly skilled workforce. And again, the core of what we do is high skills training. Companies will come to us because they need some type of training or they have a problem. And we do an assessment, figure out what technical training they need, deliver that training. We also offer workshops and seminars so they could send their employees on campus and learn about quality, Lean, Six Sigma, ISO 9000, you name it. We also put together accelerated programs. So if a company is moving into an area and they need workers rather quickly, we're able to put together training programs. Or if a company is ramping up, like Lockheed Martin did a few years ago when they were ramping up for the for the F-22, we were able to train 600 people for them over a 7-year period in carbon fiber composites, in other words, building of the skin of the aircraft. A small portion of what we do is the technical assistance, in other words, helping the small and medium manufacturers understand how to improve their processes, equipment selection, again, around that technology, also embrace sustainable practices, green technologies, process improvement, Six Sigma, and also demonstrate technology that we have on campus. We are funded by the state, and that funding allows us to fund a director and also one staff member at the centers. But we have to go out there and really hustle to bring in grant dollars. And over the last 5 years, we've secured over $37 million to, again, support the different programs. And we've gone after Department of Labor, Commerce, grants, National Science Foundation. We also go after WIB, training dollars, and ETP, employment training panel dollars. And again, all this funds the different activities to develop workforce, develop curriculum and program development at the community colleges, and also to fund our K-12 pipeline bridge projects. Again, getting those young kids interested in programs, manufacturing programs. Our most recent grant is a $3.5 million National Science Foundation grant to establish a supply chain technology education center at Riverside Community College. And with CMTA, with Jack here, we were able to secure some money to also train unemployed individuals in H-1B career pathways. On an annual basis, we serve about 11,000 incumbent workers, training them to basically skill up. We also train faculty members on the latest advances in manufacturing. We train about 60 or so a year. We serve over 1,000 employees, and we form partnerships, and that's the key to what we do, because we can't do it alone. And these are the partners that are involved in a current project in curriculum development for aerospace. And as you can see, Boeing is on there, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and a host of others. And we do it with partnerships. So we listen to industry, and a lot of what we do is industry-driven. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sarah Flocks of the California Labor Federation. And thank you for having me on this panel today. It's actually very timely because yesterday the Executive Council of the California Labor Federation, along with the building trades, released our plan for job creation and economic recovery. It's a 2-year plan that we've rolled out. And a key piece of that, in fact, our second plank after infrastructure, is investing in manufacturing and bringing back manufacturing to the state of California. And for the labor movement, manufacturing is important because we see these jobs as the pathway to the middle class. Manufacturing jobs on average pay $25,000 to $35,000 more than jobs in the service sector and in retail. There's also a multiplier effect where one manufacturing job can create 2.5 jobs in the broader economy and the supply chain. And it keeps jobs in California. We also think that in terms of advanced manufacturing, this is where California has a competitive edge and can have a competitive edge. We have a skilled workforce here. We're still innovative. I mean, we have a legacy of being on the cutting edge of technology. We have huge research capacity and are basically poised to be a leader in advanced manufacturing. We are concerned, though, that the state is falling behind in manufacturing, and part of that is because of decades of offshoring and outsourcing of manufacturing. I have a handout here from the Harvard Business Review, which is titled Why Amazon's Kindle 2 Can't Be Made in the U.S. People talk about the iPhone, but this is looking at the Kindle and all the different parts that basically there's different countries around the world, mainly in Asia, have developed more capacity to build the different components of the Kindle because companies have been offshoring for so long, for decades. And so these countries have now developed the supply chains. They have the suppliers of the right technology and the component parts. They're able to have the supplies that go into manufacturing this. So this is a critical time for the state to take action to be able to bring these manufacturers back, bring the supply chains back, so that we can become at the forefront of advanced manufacturing. So I have 4 recommendations of actions the state can take to help bring manufacturing back, and this is also included in our jobs plan. But I do want to say that this all has a cost. It all is an investment by the state, and we do support this investment, but we're clear that it has to be prioritized. Because if we're putting money into incentives for companies to come here, that means we don't have those dollars to invest, say, in the university or in education, which the panel before us said clearly is just as important. So I think that we do have to be strategic. The state has to be strategic about where money is invested to create the climate and quoting this article, the industrial commons, to bring advanced manufacturing back. And I would just like to caution also about putting incentives into the tax code, partly because it is a majority vote to create these tax incentives and tax breaks, but 2/3 to reform or repeal, which does create a problem down the line when we want to make changes, the enterprise zone case in point. So the first recommendation we have is investment in education, and investment both in K through 14 education, in science and in math, but also in career technical education. I think we can take a lesson from the building trades, who have very, very high quality and effective joint apprenticeship programs with employers. These are programs for electricians, for plumbers, different skilled trades, where you take people. We have pre-apprenticeship programs in the high schools, put them through apprenticeship programs so that they have the skills to perform jobs in the trades. I think this is a model that can be used in manufacturing as well, so that we can get trained personnel and the skills that they need. Just an example of in Germany, they have an incredible industrial power. 58% of their secondary school students are in apprenticeship programs. Siemens, which is also in Sacramento, spends $200 million annually in Germany and puts 10,000 students through apprenticeship programs, many of which they hire. So they're basically investing in a partnership with unions and with the public schools in training their workers and making sure that there's continuous vocational education so that once people are trained, that they also are retrained if they need to go into a different skill, or that they're constantly updating their skills so that as workers get older, they're still able to stay in the field and be cutting edge. The second recommendation we have is providing access to capital and startup support for manufacturers, especially those small manufacturers that one of the panelists before me referred to, those kind of 50 and under supply chain manufacturers. And I'm embarrassed to say that I was quoting Mr. Stewart, and he already used this fact already, but I took it out of his presentation from another panel, which was about the amount of venture capital that goes into innovation, but the lack of investment in manufacturing and the commercialization of that technology. So I think there are ways, and there's other examples in other states, that the state can invest to bridge that valley of death between technology innovation and then the commercialization of that technology. We moved a bill 2 years ago, and actually last year, it was an idea that we came up with the manufacturers to have a revolving loan fund for manufacturers so that they could expand, so that they could come into the state and have access to capital, to low-interest loans and loan guarantees that they weren't able to get from banks. So that's an idea that I think could be useful for some of these manufacturers. Another example is in Pennsylvania. They have the Ben Franklin Technology Partners. Since 1983, it's been a public-private partnership with the state, and they put money in to basically incubate these startup companies. So if there's some technology that they come up with, they hook them up with angel investors, with other venture capital, with the support that they need to basically get through and get that funding and start manufacturing in the state of Pennsylvania. And from 2002 to 2006, there's a study that came out that because of Ben Franklin Technology Partners, there was 10,000 jobs created, direct jobs. This is not even talking about the spillover effect, and $9.3 billion in economic activity just because of this one program. Another example is in Michigan. I think the panelists before mentioned Michigan. They've been doing some really interesting work around manufacturing and taking their auto plants and retooling them into advanced manufacturing. They have something called Michigan Smart Zones, which are, I'll say, they're kind of like enterprise zones, but smarter. And they link universities with businesses and pre-seed capital. So instead of having just a geographic area, it's a geographic area around a university. So you have that kind of linking our investments in universities and all the great inventions and kind of research capacity there, and then turning it into an actual product that can be built. And Michigan has incredible capacity for manufacturing, as does California. So third is spending our money strategically, and that would just say if we're going to buy things, we should buy them and make sure they're made in the U.S. or in California. High-speed rail and point, I mean, when we start building this, we're going to have to buy the trains eventually. There are companies in California right now who have the capacity to build those trains, and we should make sure they're built here. And then I would also say, lastly, 4 is leveraging our research and innovation capacity. There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands, I mean, maybe even more of that, patents issued every year in the state of California. Our universities are already harnessing the power of these patents. I know, and universities in other parts of the country as well. You know, New York University has been really good at making sure that they can help fund the university through all of the patents that they get. But I think the state could maybe go further in terms of using patents as a way to keep manufacturing in the state. I mean, there's, you know, I drive a Toyota Corolla that was built at NUMMI, and there's a number of different patents that go into building this car. If that patent was somehow linked to the state of California rather than a company, then it'd be a different cost-benefit analysis if Toyota wanted to move, but they couldn't take their patents with them. And Hawaii has actually done some very interesting work around the idea of patents and making sure they benefit the state that they're invented in. There's a bill moving in their house right now around LLCs that are called ingenuity corporations, where they get support from the state to take these patents, but the patent must be used to create jobs in the state. So I think there's a lot that we can do as a state to make sure that advanced manufacturing stays in California, expands in California, and has a fertile ground to expand. So thank you very much for your time.
Great. Well, thank you to all three of you. I appreciate the patience. I know the first panel went quite long, but I hope you agree that it was actually constructive and very informative. So hearing from the three of you, it tells me that we're sort of on the right track, not just having this hearing today and this conversation, but as I've mentioned, we don't have any bills before us today for consideration or action, but we know there's bills that have been introduced. Those seem to be consistent with what you're suggesting here and why we're suggesting it. So I appreciate your participation. I'll just afford an opportunity for each of the three of you to make any specific comments on the advanced manufacturing focus, the White House initiative, and any suggestions on either the federal efforts or the state's efforts to want to leverage that.
Well, I would just say that I applaud the President for focusing on manufacturing as an important growth aspect of our national economy. And I just think that what you're doing in your legislation, your advanced manufacturing legislation, hopefully is piggybacking on that to make sure California is taking advantage of the opportunities that are there. We've watched over the last few years, after the started coming out of the recession, we've seen a lot of states do very innovative things, as Sarah has mentioned, to attract manufacturing and keep manufacturing in their states and grow manufacturing. And in fact, as I said a while ago, it's working. Manufacturing employment nationwide has increased by 4%. What California needs to do, California needs to get on that bandwagon. And certainly if we want to employ our people, reduce our unemployment rate, to reduce the deficits we have in our budget, increase revenues to the state, this is another leg of the stool that I don't think we're focusing on properly at the statewide level right now. And we need to make sure we're doing that, to make sure that we have the jobs, we have the revenue to sustain our government. And I believe that manufacturing, a rebound in manufacturing, can be a big part of those solutions.
My only comment would be that we need to do something to change the image of manufacturing. If we're going to build manufacturing, I think we also have to understand that we have to fill the pipeline of workers. And to do that, we have to change the image, educate young people coming into the community college and the universities.
We need a manufacturing is cool campaign.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
We really do, and I think the three of us sitting here agree with that. I mean, you've heard we've all partnered different ways with each other to try to advance manufacturing, and we need one more partner, and that's the state government to work with us to make sure that happens.
We'll get there.
I think my last comment would be, well, thank you for having this hearing. We do think that manufacturing is important. And I think it would be good if also there were more conversations brokered between the manufacturers and labor and other stakeholders, because there's, I mean, I don't want to speak for Jack, but I think we have had some very interesting conversations, and there are areas where there's agreement that we could continue working, and we would look forward to that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Another group the CNTA has worked with is the State Building and Construction Association. We have worked with them on the CTE initiative, Get Real, for the last 5 or 6 years, and make some incremental progress, but not the kind of progress we really need to ensure the pipeline is full of students ready to take the jobs of the future.
Great. Well, thank all of you. We do have an opportunity for public comment. If there's anybody in the audience who'd like to address the committee, me. Oh, I'm sorry. We do have one more panel. I'm getting ahead of myself here. We do have an SB 71 update. Our two committees had a hearing last fall just to get an update on SB 71. Obviously, please come forward. Christine Solich from the Treasurer's Office on behalf of Treasurer Lockyer. Just cutting to the chase here, because SB 71 and CATFA specifically serving as a model for what the state can potentially do to help this advanced manufacturing sector. So we wouldn't want to replicate something that isn't working. If it is working, we'd love to replicate it or build on it. So how's it working?
Great. Thank you, Senator, for the introduction. I'm Christine Solich, the Executive Director of CATFA. As you know, Senate Bill 71 was signed into law in March of 2010, authorizing CAPFA to approve a sales and use tax exclusion on a project defined as tangible personal property utilized for the design, manufacture, production, or assembly of advanced transportation or alternative source products, components, and systems. The legislation requires CAPFA to evaluate the extent to which the project develops manufacturing in California, provides benefits to the state equal or greater than the sales tax exclusion, creates new and permanent jobs and considers areas of high unemployment, and reduces greenhouse gases and other pollutants in the state. Regulations were enacted in October of 2010, and we began accepting applications immediately. In the last year and a half that the program has been enacted, CAPFA has approved 40 applications for projects throughout the state, representing over $1.5 billion in equipment purchases and an estimated $136 million in sales and use tax exclusions. Of those approved, 31 projects are still moving forward, representing $1 billion in purchases and an estimated $85 million in sales tax exclusions. As background on the project eligibility and evaluation, as I mentioned, a project is defined as the equipment and the machinery or the qualified property that is utilized in the design or manufacture, et cetera. And the equipment must be used for these purposes for at least 50% of the time in any one year and 75% of the time on average over the long term. The evaluation criteria is designed to measure and quantify the fiscal and environmental benefits of the project and to compare the result to the cost of the sales and use tax benefit. This net benefit evaluation assumes that the sales and use tax exclusion reduces the cost of machinery and equipment for the applicant, and therefore the applicant purchases more equipment. The increase in purchases is expected to translate into an increase in output and sales. And the fiscal effects of this additional output, such as the proportional share of corporate and other taxes the entity will pay, as well as the environmental effects, the dollar value of the avoided pollution for each unit of increased output, together represent the net benefits to the state, which are translated into a numerical score. A score above 1,000 points means that the net benefit to the state is greater than the tax avoided for the equipment and machinery purchases contemplated. Of the 40 approved applicants, 31 are currently active. The 31 active applicants are anticipated to purchase close to $1 billion in equipment and machinery over the next 3 years, equating to approximately $85 million in sales and use tax exclusions. Of the projects approved, there are several that are not going to move forward. A couple have gone out of business. Others did not move forward as planned given economic conditions. Or other projects have changed substantially and they've had to reapply, just to name a few of the reasons. The various types of active projects are solar panel manufacturers, which represent about 1/3 of the projects approved, electric vehicle manufacturing, LED lighting manufacturing, electric vehicle batteries, fuel cells, and others. These projects are located across the state in 12 counties, with a concentration in the San Francisco Bay Area, particularly the Santa Clara County. Together, the projects are anticipated to create over 5,300 permanent and construction jobs, of which close to 500 jobs are attributed to assistance by SB 71. And these projects are anticipated to yield approximately $111 million in fiscal benefits and $68 million in environmental benefits, resulting in an anticipated net benefit to the state of approximately $94 million. In general, applicants are required to purchase at least 25% of their equipment within 1 year and the remainder within 3 years. To date, over 1/3 of the projects approved have sought waivers from the board to allow them time to purchase the machinery and equipment, due to a number of issues ranging from environmental permitting delays, tool equipment back orders, and financing delays, just to name a few. As I mentioned, the initial program regulations were enacted in October of 2010. Since then, staff has been working to improve the program and incorporate lessons learned. In September of 2001, several key modifications were enacted. We created a mechanism to allow for the recovery of the financial assistance. In the event that an applicant doesn't use the equipment for the eligible purposes or removes the equipment from the state. And we strengthened the substantial use test to make sure that applicants were really going to be making an alternative source or the advanced transportation product. We also expanded the requirements for annual reporting by the applicants, and we revised the net benefit scoring methodology. And most recently, in March of this year, we added a provision to better balance the business needs of applicants to upgrade equipment given rapidly changing technologies. And as I heard from the Senator today, that 18 months is pretty much the lifespan of technology today. This provision allows applicants with CAPFA approval to move a portion of the equipment out of the state before the required 3-year period, as long as it is part of an improvement or an upgrade or an economic efficiency to the project. So this provision just became effective, and we have not had a request to exercise it yet. With respect to ongoing legislative oversight, CAPFA is required to notify the legislature at the time exclusions granted exceed $100 million annually before making any additional approvals. This notice was provided to the legislature in August of last year, prior to reaching $100 million, as opposed to exceeding the $100 million. We did this in the abundance of caution, given the pending applications in the pipeline, which took us over the $100 million within the next month. And finally, I'd like to speak to the transparency in the program that is a great benefit for the users. The application for this program is available on the CAPFA website and consists of 2 parts. There's a required narrative of the project, and there's a data input sheet, which is an Excel-based spreadsheet. One of the benefits to applicants is that they can self-score prior to submitting an application, and if they successfully score, they can count on the benefit of the sales and use tax exclusion in their business planning process. Most are startup companies, and this certainly helps in their decision-making process. We also post a pipeline report of the approved projects on our website, and it's updated monthly, and it's available to anyone who accesses our website. And in conclusion, and with respect to the overall program evaluation, it's really too early to evaluate the program with respect to the benefits to the state. We are trying to capture as much data as we can. The applicants are required to report annually on actual activity, including their total payroll, the number of full-time jobs, including the types of jobs, the actual number of units they produce with a qualified property, corporate and other taxes they've paid to the state, an explanation of any material changes, and many other data points. We have just collected the first annual reports, and we are in the process of reviewing the information provided. We don't have full data yet. For many, they had very little to report as they experienced delays or they were just getting started. As I mentioned, we are now following 31 projects that have benefited from SB 71, and we have more in the pipeline to come. This annual reporting will allow us to evaluate the full fiscal and environmental benefits derived from this program, as well as the jobs created and the types of jobs and the locations. That is the end of my report. I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you. That was very thorough, very clear, and I think very encouraging, even though you don't have the final data yet. Some of the initial numbers meet some of the big criteria that were important to the legislature, starting with the net revenue benefit to the state and the job creation. So it's not just about trying to support an industry theoretically and seeing more science go up and making people feel good, but putting people back to work or to work. So we look forward to the final data set in your analysis and a future report on how the program is working. And again, if there's lessons learned or pitfalls identified, we want to take that into account in any advanced manufacturing strategy discussion or debate. But to the extent that there's some success to build on or replicate, we certainly want to hear that sooner rather than later as well.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Senator. Thank you.
And now an opportunity for members of the public to address the committee. If you feel compelled to do so, I know it's been a long afternoon. Seeing no stampede to the microphone, let me just make a few comments here in closing and to just have it on the record. First and foremost, I want to thank James Schwab from my office sitting to my right for all the work he's put into not just the issue, but the coordinating and organizing of this hearing. Couldn't have happened without you, James. He's now an advanced manufacturing expert after a whopping 3 months. Second, to just flat out admit where the inspiration, the idea came from for me. Many of you know that in my spare time I serve on a couple of boards outside my role here in the legislature, one of them being MIT. So there I was last December sitting at an MIT board meeting hearing directly from President Hockfield of MIT about a joint MIT State of Massachusetts effort to pursue an advanced manufacturing partnership to leverage with the Obama administration's advanced manufacturing partnership. And given Route 128 and that golden triangle between Harvard, MIT, and Mass General Hospital, how Massachusetts and MIT were perfectly positioned to be competitive for resources. And I'm thinking to myself, well, why not California? Either can we start something new, or is there something already in place in California to build on to accomplish the same? With all due respect to MIT and Harvard, and I'm an MIT alum, we have not just Berkeley and Stanford, but we have UCLA, Caltech, USC. We have Scripps. We have institutions up and down the state of California on the academic side. We certainly have the success in history on the entrepreneurial side and in the business community. And so it seems to me that all the necessary ingredients are in California, and if not even better in California than any other state. So that's what spawned the idea for not just legislation, but beyond just legislation, what we can do to help industries across the board. And it seems to me is also to not just be about manufacturing and job creation, although that's certainly a starting point. But given California's leadership in a number of policy objectives, whether it's alternative sources of our electricity, whether it is AB 32 and greenhouse gas reduction mandates now in place, this advanced manufacturing brings about an opportunity to achieve multiple objectives, not just putting people back to work, but the environmental goals that we've laid out for our state, while paying close attention to cost competitiveness for our industries and how, not if, but how we achieve those very environmental objectives. So it's got to be able to translate into the market, the quantification and having made a commodity of that, whether it's GHG reduction or renewable energy tax credit or anything else. It's all really coalescing here in this conversation. And last but not least, when we talk about creating incentives for manufacturers to expand or to move or to locate initially, yes, we can and should continue to talk about education. We can and should continue to talk about tax structures and how competitive California is or isn't in these areas. But coming back to why I think California is best positioned to really catapult this, and that is our innovation and R&D strength. It was recognized repeatedly during the various presentations today, continues to be in the press by the federal government and so many others. So we're not starting from scratch. We're not starting a state of California that, well, how are we going to do in education, taxes, and R&D as if we don't have a history to point to. We excelled in education once upon a time. We're struggling a little bit right now for a number of reasons, but without too much trouble, we can be back on top. When it comes to a skilled workforce, again, we have a history to build on. But when it comes to R&D and venture capital, it is a strong suit because people recognize the strength of California's creativity and innovation, and it's a matter of harnessing that and keeping it here beyond the R&D stage, beyond the R&D and D stage, beyond the R&D and D stage, and into the scaling up stage, and that is where the true economic growth and jobs potential is. So with that, again, I want to thank you all for your patience and participation today, and we'll see you at a future hearing. Thank you.